Welcome to the C Word, the Conservatives podcast. Today we're talking about 0-hour contracts. I'm Jenny Mathiasson, an Objects Conservator based in Carmarthenshire.
And I'm Kloe Rumsey, an Objects Conservator based in Manchester.
Welcome, guys.
Hello, everyone.
Today we're going to talk about 0-hour contracts and sort of casual work. I think from our point of view, mostly conservators, but also a little bit broader than that in the museum world. For that, we've got some fabulous people with us. Guest hosts, would you like to introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hello, everyone. I'm Tom Hopkins. I'm a co-founder of Fair Museum Jobs. I currently work as a curator based in the West Midlands and have previously worked across various collections management roles in museums.
And I'm Louise, McAward-White. I am also a co-founder of Fair Museum Jobs, and I've worked any job in museums that I could get paid for. So events, education, front of house, documentation, collections management, curating, not conservation. So yeah, that's me.
Welcome.
So nice to have you here.
I'm pretty excited that we've got Fair Museum Jobs on board for this one, to be honest.
We're obviously big fans.
We're big fans, and we're coming in hard on this topic. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm really excited.
Coming in hard.
That's definitely our default mode, coming in hard. So I think we should be fine.
Yep.
Exactly.
Always at 11. That sounds about right.
Exactly.
Maybe the first thing I love opening with a definition is sort of like, so we're talking about 0-hour contracts, but if there are people who don't know what they are, and maybe people abroad, you may find that you call them something different. So what is a 0-hour contract, guys? Do we have some sort of idea what the definition is?
Also known as casual working.
I have
casual workers.
Certainly noticed that that's what we've started labeling it.
Which seems ridiculous to me because it's like, oh yeah, I'll just, stroll into work.
Super cash.
Maybe write an email and go home. Like
It sounds less threatening than 0 hours.
Yeah.
It does. Yeah,
it's definitely trying to dress something up a little bit, guys.
Yeah.
It's trying to get away from that.
I think it's financial uncertainty and precarity, which is the thing it's trying to dress up.
Yeah, it is a little bit.
So essentially you have a job that you might not if they don't need you in. So you can be working or you can not be working.
Yeah.
This is a thing, because I feel like when I sort of over the years have talked about this sort of employment with other people, they've been like, oh, so it's just a temporary contract. And I'm like, no, like a temporary contract or a fixed term contract, there are things that you have a certain amount of hours and you know how long you're there for, you know what the expectations are, you're guaranteed a certain amount of work because it's what you're contracted to do.
Well, a 0 hours contract can also be a temporary contract or a permanent contract. You could, those are two separate bits of contract, brought together. So a really common example, I think, of a 0 hours contract is maybe something where there's a busy period over the summer and they will contract for 3 months, 0 hours front of house workers to cover that really busy opening period, for example. That's a really common usage of 0 hours contracts.
It does tend to be used a lot for things like seasonal work, that sort of thing. But as it sort of says on the tin, a 0-hour contract or like a 0-hour job is you guaranteed zero. Yeah. They are not guaranteeing you anything. So it could be
you could have 37 hours a week or one or none.
Or none. Yeah, exactly. And it's tricky to plan for working in one of those. It's one of those, if you're lucky to have another source of income, or this can be alongside maybe a part-time job or something like that. You can have other bits of employment alongside this type of employment, which can be nice and can be flexible. But equally, if this is your only source of income, it's extremely precarious. And, then we're back to sort of... This is a thing that I bring up all the time in conservation, being kept women, because often conservators are women. Then you're relying on your other half to bring in their work, their money, to pay rent and stuff like that. And this can, of course, be a terribly stressful situation. Not that all conservators are women. That's not what I'm saying. But it is certainly female dominated. 0-hour contracts they guarantee you no work in particular. They do give you some actual employment rights though. So it's not a complete cop-out on, like, this isn't slave labor. This isn't that bad.
You will be paid for the hours you work and not more. There is some allowance for, I believe, sick pay and holiday, but only in relation to the hours you work.
Well, that's where those two sentences you've just said sometimes, I think, in reality contradict each other. Ooh. Because in theory, you don't get paid more than the hours you work. But in practice, and in my own experience on a 0 hours contract, what actually happened was that they added a percentage differential onto the number of hours you worked to negate the fact that actually you don't get sick time. If you are ill on a day you could be at work, you didn't work that day and you don't get paid. And the same for holidays. So in theory, you are entitled to holiday time, but in practice, you're just not going to be rotated when you say you're away and you're not going to get that. So they often, an employer will add on like a couple of % to your pay that you know, put in for on that contract. So it's true and not true at the same time.
Yeah.
A common line, and a line that I will read out from one of the adverts that I know sparked this whole episode, is in fact, holiday pay will be paid on top of the hourly rate, and eligibility under a pension scheme also applies. So that's the sort of standard line, is that there will be something extra on top because you're not getting these sort of usual things. That's pretty common.
But it's really important to note that all other employment law does apply to you. Like employer health and safety applies to all employees of any kind. If you was on a 0 hours contract for a long time with an employer, you would become eligible for, everything else like maternity leave, paternity leave, all other redundancy and all of those kinds of things. The same as you would if you were on any other kind of contract where those things would apply over time.
And is that based on the number of hours that you work? So, for example, if you were on someone's books for 6 months, but only did, say, 2 months worth of work, you wouldn't be eligible for things like parental
leave. Length of employment is the date your contract to be a 0 hours worker started. And time just elapses. It's not the amount of hours you work that make you eligible.
Okay.
It's the time that you work there. And the same as for part-time workers. If someone's working part-time, their probation doesn't take twice as long. It takes the same amount of time. It's just those are your hours. So no, it is absolutely the legal length of time passing in the normal linear fashion that applies to you.
Yeah, this isn't like you don't have to unlock your rights by spending a certain amount of hours with your employer. That isn't how it works. Thank God.
I like that.
It is a good point about the sort of length of time with an employer that sort of makes you eligible to maybe be properly employed. This was certainly an interesting thing somewhere I worked in the past, where essentially they cut everyone off after a certain amount of time, so they would not be eligible to become employed. So there was a cutoff point where you're no longer on the books because
9 months, that's it.
Then we have to employ you, and we're not gonna.
Sort of like parking where you can't return within a certain amount of time.
Yes, exactly that. So the parking scheme of employment, which is nice and exploitative in a different direction, but
And I mean, that's really the key word I think that we're going to be coming back to here is exploitative. A lot of things about 0 hours contracts can be exploitative. And it all depends on how they're implemented and why they're being used as to whether that word applies or not. And I feel like there's a lot to delve into what you can do with a 0 hours contract, because I wouldn't say that we're fundamentally against them in theory. What we're against is the myriad of bad practice associated with the use of 0 hours contracts.
Exactly. And I reckon we're going to get into that a bit more later, actually, because I would love for listeners to take away like how these things can be handled well, because it's not that you can't ever do this. It's like there are genuine good things can be about 0 hour contracts, the flexibility that they offer. You can have another job alongside them. You can turn down the work. You're not obligated to work it if you don't want to or you're busy doing something else.
I'm against them.
Ooh.
I'm just going to say I'm against them.
Just hard against them.
Hard against.
Excellent. Okay.
I definitely could have my mind changed. I was just going to pick up on the fact that, Jenny, you mentioned that you can take up other work while you're doing a 0 hours contract. In fact, you legally cannot be prevented from doing so.
Yes.
It's a really important point. I suppose in many ways we should thank Sports Direct for that being enshrined legally, because it was a big thing with Sports Direct 0 hour contracts a few years ago, that their staff were treated incredibly badly. I mean, I think still are treated quite badly, but could not take up other work even when they were on 0 hours contracts. And the outcry of that actually made that be a legally factual thing. As much,
Another point in its favor is that, I mean, there are very few exceptions to this, surely. But, you have to be paid the national minimum wage on a 0-hour contract. You can't be, paid 2p an hour or something. Like it isn't slave labor. It's you have to be, you have the basic employment right, or like it has to be.
Yeah, but we cannot say that the positive of this situation that it is not slave labor.
No, I mean, you are quite right. You are quite
We're being
right.
paid. I mean, what's to complain about?
Absolutely. And here is a completely different level of fightiness as well, because then we're going to get into, but national minimum wage is probably not appropriate for conservatives and it's not livable for most people.
Everyone.
So actually, that's not that great.
I mean, we advocate for the minimum of real living wage because that's a thing that exists and can be known and is based on research.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. But when we say minimum, what we really mean is like literally the very least you can do, as opposed to do this. It's not a suggestion, it's a flaw.
Yeah.
Do better.
Exactly.
I find it interesting that actually on the government website there are there's like a guidance section on like what's appropriate use of like 0-hour contracts. Like it's not an exhaustive list. They have 5 examples, right? One of them is new businesses, so you're brand new, you don't know how you're going to cope financially yet and stuff like that. That's
it's sort
acceptable.
Of goodwill almost that your employers are going, okay, well, I'll work under these conditions in order to help you get off the ground.
It's more that fluctuating and unpredictable demands might come up, if you see what I mean. But
that's great for our industry, which famously has so many.
Yeah, I was going to say.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Clearly does not apply to heritage.
Well, some of these museums are only 100 years old. I mean, give them some credit,
How can they plan their time effectively so young?
The second one they bring up is seasonal work, which is something we've already sort of talked about. That if you know that you've got busy times over the summer, for example, when you've got increased open hours and stuff, that can be a good thing.
There are such things as annualized contracts, though, which is
Or you could just know that every summer you need to properly employ more people, and here is another point actually, because I have worked alongside people who have had pools of casual staff or 0-hour contract people who've had to ring around, ring 20 people and ask if they can cover the shift on Sunday, and none of them can because, they've got other stuff on. They are allowed to turn down the work, and they still can't find anyone because it's not shift work in that sense, or it's not rotated in the same way and stuff like that. So actually, this seems to be more of a headache, honestly, than just employing people properly and making sure that you have people cover all the bits. It actually doesn't seem to solve anything in some ways.
Can we just have a quick explanation of annualized contracts, please?
How to process. So say you've got a contract that lasts over a year. You've got a busy period in the summer, but a quieter period in the winter. You may be working full-time hours in the summer months, and then over winter you might go down to something like half-time.
Right. But you would know that in advance.
And they normally would be advertised saying something like 1,500 hours a year, and it would give you at least some indication of when in the year those hours would be.
I've seen that for National Trust, so either front of house in the summer or like we do a deep clean every winter, so your hours are in the winter.
Yeah, exactly. So I definitely feel like this is, or at least used to be, fairly common practice. I don't know that I see it as much anymore, perhaps because this sort of style of employment, the 0-hour contract type stuff, has possibly superseded a little bit, but I'm not sure. The next example is unexpected sickness. So to cover staff sickness. This, I feel, is a completely appropriate use of stuff, because what I'm annoyed by is that most of the time in heritage organizations, everyone's worked to the bone. And as soon as someone goes down sick, everyone has to do 3 times the amount of work, somehow just make it work. If in actual fact we could just call in some extra help on those times, because every business, including museums and heritage organizations, should plan for people being off sick. That's business planning. You should be able to plan for that and somehow make adjustments when appropriate, as opposed to just go, can everyone else just work really extra hard? The next category is special events. So their sort of thing here is like a wedding venue might need extra staff for when the actual weddings are on, or catering, that sort of thing.
I mean, I would take some issue with that, because like your special events aren't a sudden surprise to you. You know, the wedding venue example, you're not planning your wedding the week before. You're booking that venue 6 months minimum. If you're lucky, it's 6 months. And I think that's the same for museums, you know, and heritage. You know when your big event periods are. Maybe it's the same weekend every year, or maybe it's not, but you're not planning it 2 days before. You know what's coming up. So you could not use a 0 hours contract for that if you wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like the special events one is one that will probably be more likely to be abused by businesses of all kinds, including heritage, I feel.
Yeah, I have opinions about that.
That one might be a little bit interesting.
I have opinions based on the main institution that kicked this off, but we can talk about that a little later.
We definitely can. The final category that they say, that they sort of have as an example of a good use case would be testing out a new service. So you're an already established company or whatever, and you're trying to figure out if you actually want to roll out a new service. So you're trying it out. So you're not committing to hiring the new staff before you know if it's even viable. And I'm like, I'm trying to think of a time when I think that's a good idea. Because I'm like, I see what you're saying, but also I don't know how I feel about it.
But also, what if it's a trial? Why not contract staff for 3 months?
Yeah, like surely if you just do a short-term contract, then why would the overheads be so different? But
then again, short-term contracts are another, you know, precarious problem. They have,
absolutely.
And then you do get into a bit of a, well, which problems are the least worst?
You do.
For an employer on one hand, but also for an employee, what is the precarity that's, for lack of a better way of asking the question, which precarity is easier to manage for an individual? And that's the problem with that is there's never going to be a answer, because it's different for everybody how you can, you know, manage your life with everything else that's going on in it.
Yeah. My personal opinion is the more information you have, the better. So if you had, recently I was asked to decide whether, when we were hiring someone, I was told I wasn't allowed someone full time. This is now, the whole situation has now changed. But it was either you have someone for 4 days a week for 6 months, or you have someone full time for 2 months, or something roughly along those lines. Those aren't the real numbers. And I was thinking, okay, well, I would say personally, having someone 4 days a week for 6 months would be preferable to full time for 2 months, because at least then you've got 6 months. You can get your rented accommodation for 6 months, and then for those that additional 1 day, you can get a part-time job or something, and you know how many hours you're being paid for, you know what your income's going to be, and you know how long for. But if it's a 0 hour contract, you can't even get the different days.
I think what you said about accommodation is really interesting.
Yeah.
If there's anybody who has moved house recently, like some of us know how difficult it is, even if you've got a permanent contract on a relatively good salary, it's really, really difficult. So if you don't have that, it's hard. And it's limiting the pool of people who can do that work.
So in the UK, at least, you usually need to upfront pay for a month of your rent in advance, and whatever your deposit is, which could be an additional month's rent, or like £1,000 or something like that, depending on where you are in the size of the flat or house or room or whatever. And so you can only do that so many times. You can only rent for, say, 6 months and then a rolling contract or whatever. But you want to have some level of idea of what you're doing and where.
And I think there's a genuine brewing crisis actually in museums and heritage of people who are having to have a patchwork career, moving around constantly, temporary contracts, 0 hours jobs, fitting everything together like a jigsaw puzzle that is pieces from completely different jigsaw puzzles. Yeah. And then you're not forming roots in a place because you're constantly having to look for the next thing. Yeah. It's hard to focus on your job if you know in 2 months you've already got to be looking for the next job. And I think we are doing a disservice to ourselves and to everyone who is employed in any form of what we're actually expecting from people. And that is exacerbated by 0 hours contracts 100%, because the uncertainty is so much higher, because if your employer is not doing a good job with its 0 hours contract pool, you might not know on a Monday whether you're working on the other days that week.
Yeah.
And, there are things people can do to sort of mitigate that, but it never goes away fully. Even if you're rotated, a month in advance always, things change and the certainty just isn't there. And that's if you get paid. Because a big problem that I have read multiple times and experienced is if you're on a 0 hours contract and they don't think you've handed your timesheet in on time, or your manager doesn't sign your timesheet, or your timesheet doesn't go to the right person, you don't get paid for that month. And that is just so unacceptable that we would ever think, oh, someone's done a month of work, but it's okay. They can wait till next month for us to pay them. No, they can't. Have you seen the world? I can barely do 10 minutes after my paycheck comes in. It's not acceptable at all for that to ever happen.
Once we may have been paid weekly or bi-weekly.
Weekly.
Yeah, to sort of help stagger it a bit. Although that's an insane amount of paperwork to be filling out literally all of the time, which is also an interesting carousel of nightmares. Also, an angle that I never really hear people talk about, because now I've seen sort of both sides, I guess. Before, I was the one doing the 0 hour contracts. And then for a bit there, I was employed and I saw other people do 0 hour contracts and really, really short-term temporary work. And something I observed in the people around me who were on, let's say, steadier contracts, longer term, maybe even permanently employed, is the sort of institutional trauma you are actually putting them through for constantly having to get to know new people and try to not manage them, because that sounds like that's not their job. Obviously it is, but more of a getting to know someone well enough to know how they work best, who they work best with, how they can be part of the team, how they can be supported at work, only to have them sort of whisked away because obviously it's a precarious employment situation. And like the sort of amount of sort of personal trauma, this sort of, everyone seemed battered for the experience, that they just sort of didn't know how long this person was going to be around for. If they got on really well, the sort of immense sense of loss when they obviously went to find a better job somewhere else was almost palpable. It was really interesting.
Yeah, that's something that really strikes me, that it's I don't know if it's particularly in museums, but there is a particular situation in museums of institutional and collections knowledge that one builds over time. And it's maybe in conservation in particular, it's about perhaps the specialism, and if it's a curatorial, it's about, knowledge that builds on itself. We learn about, you don't turn up in a collection and you know what's there, because the museums don't know what's there. Working in the space, moving things around that are gigantic, knowing about the equipment, all of that, and where stuff is in the museum, and how you turn this on, and how to store this, or where all of those things, collections history, where the different information, if you're doing documentation, where the different object history files are and stuff, or none of that. You don't know any of that if you just start.
Where the stopcock is, where you turn off the fire alarm.
How do you switch the electricity off in the event of a leak? You don't get that build up. So it's constantly, for the people that work there permanently or have been there for a while, you're constantly giving that induction. But if you're that individual, and for the sake of the institution, you don't have people who know about the collection because you don't give them a chance.
I think as well, if you're not there, you're not practicing that knowledge. Like if you're on a 0 hours contract and you come in once a month to do something, remembering in between, and if you have other jobs in other organizations, there's only so much your mind can hold. And I absolutely have forgotten things in that time. If I've not used it for a month, how am I going to remember? I mean, I can't remember where every fire assembly point is. If I'm working 3 jobs or all kinds, it's a lot to expect of somebody.
My level of confusion after a holiday is extreme, and I only work in one place, and I'm often only away for a week.
But I think the thing about institutional knowledge is really important. I'm 3 years into my current job, and I'm still finding caches of documents that are really helpful that I didn't know they were going to be in this particular location. That's still happening, and it's probably going to still be happening another 3 years down the line and more.
And I think if you're on a 0 hours contract and that's you don't know everything. I think there's a wariness sometimes of permanent or longer contract staff to, and this sounds like an awful thing to say, but to give away their information. Because if you're constantly working with a new stream of people, you're going to feel protective of your institution. And I mean, that's a whole different discussion that I don't want to get into. They won't love you back, guys, as Alice Proctor says. But it makes that working relationship harder when there's a constant churn of people, because you don't always feel like you want to share everything with someone who's just come in, 2 minutes ago, and you might not have ever met them before, and then you're working with them intensely on a short-term project, as this, the job that prompted this discussion suggests you will be.
It's a bit of a mess. I also find it interesting that the guidance specifically says the 0 hours contracts are not appropriated for regular hours, if you see what I mean. If it's like regular hours over a continuous period of time, because that means it should be a regular contract. Yeah. So if you're expected to come in between 9 a.m. and 1 p.m. Monday to Wednesday for like a 12-month period, then that is a different type of contract.
That's a job.
It shouldn't be a 0 hour contract, for example. I have definitely done that, though.
I was on a 0 hours contract working full-time for 6 months.
Wow.
And they knew I was going to be working full-time for 6 months, and I was on a 0 hours contract. I was always the person in for the cleaner in the morning, opening up. I was the last to leave, and I wrote down every single one of those hours, and I got all my money because I knew they were taking the piss, but I was like, you know what? At least I can rake it in.
Yeah.
Because, what else can I do with this to my advantage apart from play that system and get as much money as possible?
You have very little power in that situation, so you got to use the only thing you can, which is I work these hours, pay me.
So shall we talk about what is happening in the world of casual and 0 hour contracts in conservation in specific? Because this is something that I've been aware of, as obviously Jenny and I have worked in the same place on something that equated to a 0 hour, but there was a little bit more stability in that as we knew the project. And did we have any assurance? I'm not sure if we did.
I think it was not a firm assurance. I think it was more about, we will essentially need you for this amount of time, for these amounts of hours. But because we sort of can't write that down properly, it'll have to be a casual contract.
Yeah.
It was a lot of workarounds, similarly to, you can only be here for 9 months. After that, you will be let go because that way we have to work around this, etc., etc. And I then carried on doing this for longer than you did, Kloe. I think you moved on before me. So this was a whole thing. There was a point, I should say, where essentially I was told on the day that, from next week it's going to be half of that amount of time, because we're rejigging it. And I burst into tears in front of this person. And, because they didn't live in a world where that meant that we would be evicted from our lodging. Like they didn't live in a world where that would matter. So that's a problem.
I think it maybe is significant that the museums that had the projects, they were paying us in that format because that's the solution that the specific university had to pay for casual workers, which was set up in order to pay students whilst they were studying.
Yeah, it wasn't really meant to bring in people from outside and do these sorts of jobs.
But it was the solution that was there. That was the format that they used.
I think there's a real issue with actually everyone pushing back when they get told, you could have a 0 hours contract post do this. Well, what if we didn't have that and you come to me with something else that answers my question? Or if I tell you this is a solution that will work. And I do think this is why Fair Museum Jobs had to exist, because we're not pushy enough in heritage to advocate for ourselves.
Yeah.
I think one of the issues as well is that so much of the sector is dependent on project funding. And that, by its very nature, is going to be fixed term and temporary. Yes. And maybe this is just a broken model of funding.
I'm pretty sure we can 100% say that it is a broken model of funding and something needs to change.
It's like, here's a shiny thing, can we have money for it? Instead of something that's actually more sustainable, longer term.
Yeah, we know we're going to be doing an exhibition a year for the next 5 years. So let's fund it for 5 years rather than per year or per exhibition.
Well, not just that, like, a commitment to a program of, we will always be aiming to do at least one exhibition a year.
Yeah.
So always have that funding.
Yeah.
Another thing we've seen a lot is really, really terrible job adverts with a major funder's logo splashed all over it. And it would just be really nice to see some accountability as well, and a prerequisite for project funding that actually any project staff are going to be recruited and treated fairly.
Because it's a direct contradiction to say you value diversity and inclusion and the things that all museums are now saying they value and want, and then to treat your staff badly and to recruit them poorly and unfairly pay them, because 0 hours contracts are a direct line to a less diverse workforce.
Yes.
There are many reasons that it's true, but I mean, we've touched on some already around, you just can't afford to live and pay rent. And if you're already marginalized in many different ways, being a carer, living in particular areas of the country, your educational background, there's so many factors that are going to impact your ability to take on this work. And then the people who can take this work on are going to be more of the kind of homogenized museum workforce that we already have.
It's basically an option really only open to people with some form of financial safety net.
Or people building that patchwork and working 4 jobs and stressed out of their minds and get half a day off a week.
Sometimes living on people's sofas because that's the only option.
Yeah. A lot of couch surfing for sure. Or people who do insane things and borrow money.
While I was quite early on in my career, I was working 3 jobs, 1 0 hours and 2 contracted posts. And there was a point at which I had no money to travel to work, and someone anonymously left a tenner in an envelope in my pigeonhole at one of my jobs, because they knew that I couldn't get to work at all if I didn't have that money, because if all your paychecks come in the same bit of the month, there's a bit where you're going to be struggling. And I think there's a reluctance to actually talk about that and what that means, because we do experience that thing of people not understanding that actually I've got a lot of bills to pay. I've got a lot of things going on that make it hard for me to work in this way, because there are still a lot of upper middle class people working in museums who might have no concept of the fact that cost of living is increasing, and there are problems. Usually
those are the people in charge or the people who do the recruiting, which is the thing, because they higher up the food chain, because that's where they're at. That poses a problem. And that's, how I ended up crying in front of someone who had never considered that they might be employing someone who's poor. Hadn't even, it didn't enter their worldview. They are a lovely person and, were absolutely great. But I'm just saying they didn't live in the same world as me, which is interesting. And that can be a big problem.
Back to how these are coming into conservation. I've known about these. We've obviously, as I was saying, we have worked in them. It tends to be for the other experience that Jenny and I have done, and you still do, Jenny, as freelancer, is working as a freelancer in an exhibition venue rather than a museum, that sort of thing. But that's not 0 hour, that's freelance. And then about a year ago, I got an email from a member of the senior leadership team of my museum, which was really interesting because my museum is about workers' rights, basically, more or less about workers' rights. And it was a link to the Lancashire County Conservation Studio advertising for 0 hour or I think it was called casual. Let me just find the actual words so that I'm doing it. An appropriate disservice? I don't know.
Accurate representation of it.
An accurate representation. Yeah, it was casual hours per week. Yeah, Conservation and Collections casual hours, it was called. Yeah, it was 0 hour. Salary £15 per hour, which I think we should talk about salaries later on. And this was just sharing this as a model of something that we could do potentially if we had too much work. And thought it was unacceptable from the start, so we didn't follow through with this. But that was the first introduction, was somebody from higher up in the museum saying, how about this as an idea? Somebody else is doing it, so maybe we can do it too.
Well, I'm glad that you could have input and say this is inappropriate.
Well, what I don't know, I have not spoken to Lancashire Conservation Studio, but frankly, because I didn't have time, basically, no other reason than that. So I don't know where it came from. I think the advert that was sent to me was specifically in conjunction with a project. So Rochdale Town Hall project. So they needed specialists like paintings and things like that for that specific project. I don't know what they're doing now, and I have not spoken to anyone. So if anyone has any information, I'd be really interested to hear. I've heard on the grapevine that the Tate Museum are doing something a little bit more unofficial, so they don't advertise, but they encourage CVs from specialists, basically specialist conservators, if they need more textiles or more books or more whatever.
So they're taking a thing that's already a problem and making it more problematic by making it also rely on networks that you may or may not have access to.
It's about networks. Yeah. So what I did contact a friend at the Tate, but I have not heard anything, and I've not been able to find any information about it online. I've just heard this is grapevine talking here.
But regardless of whether it's true or not, I think we can probably say, please don't do that.
It is gated quite substantially. And again, I don't know how many hours they would be thinking. I don't know if maybe there is a 0-hour format at the Tate that allows people to be paid in this way. I don't know whether they would be paid as a freelancer. I'm particularly interested in the use of freelancers in this situation, conservation freelancers in this situation, on wages that are far, far lower than we expect freelancers to work at. I spoke briefly to our friend Exhibitions Tech about this, because Exhibitions Techs work on this format all the time.
Yeah, they do.
Basically what she said was that sometimes they set the price, often she sets the price. The differences she saw between conservation and Exhibitions Tech is in terms of qualifications and in terms of regulation and what conservation is required to provide to assure that we're, good at our jobs. So it isn't unheard of in museums by any means, and there are whole chunks of freelancers like exhibition techs that work specifically on short-term contract. Well, not even as work as freelancers. But I don't know.
But I think there's a real different thing there. And for me, it's about choice. If you are working as a freelancer, you have chosen, hopefully, most of the time, you've chosen to work as a freelancer. And you know what that means? In a best case scenario, freelancing is a choice that you've actively made. But I think there is definitely an issue there with 0 hours contracts being used because you don't want to pay a freelancer's day rate.
Yeah.
Basically, because like £15 an hour is not acceptable pay if you're asking for a qualified conservator with however much experience, or any other museum role with this qualification and this experience. £15 an hour is not acceptable. And you're asking for that because you don't want to pay a freelancer. I have no doubt in my mind that that's the choice they've made.
Well, exactly. Shall we get specific here? Who are we talking about? Let's say from this point that we are not hating on you, lovely V&A.
Is this a bit where we say we have friends at the V&A? Please don't hate us.
We have friends at the V&A. It's not that we...
They're a symptom of a problem. They're not the source of the disease.
So we're talking about the V&A 0 hour contract worker pool. That is the phrasing. They have advertised for a pool of conservators for 0 hour work for, I'm going to read the words, loans, exhibitions and display. Yeah. A pool of freelance conservators for loans, exhibitions, displays.
Not freelance conservators, 0 hours conservators.
They call for freelance conservators, which I think is significant. Yep. Pool of freelance conservators for loans, exhibitions, displays. Early career conservators with a recognised professional conservation qualification, general and specialised, and they must demonstrate practical skills. Remuneration will be based on the complexity of the project between £16 and £28 per hour. That's what we're talking about. there's been a bit of a stir with this. And I feel like that we're not hating on you, V&A, by any means, but there is
there are some problems here to address.
There's one of the things, like, I didn't kick off about the Lancashire Conservation Studio one because it's a smaller institution. Let's face it, the larger
you let them get away with it.
the larger institutions must be operating to a higher degree.
Okay, be better is what you're saying. Like,
be better. You set the standard for the world. Don't do this.
I think the issue is that they have enormous amounts of prestige and fame, so they will put up any job advert and will get all of the applicants in the world, which means they can depress their salaries as far as they want. Because they're big grand national institutions as well, they tend to draw leadership from people more removed from the precarity of everyday life. And I think there is a little bit of a lack of empathy and understanding about just what people are going through at the moment.
We see this all the time as well with job adverts from another big famous museum, the British Museum, which always seems to underpay their staff something vicious. Because again, people love working for the British Museum. It's such a great name to put on your CV, etc., etc., etc.
We call that the curse of gratitude.
Ooh.
You're made so grateful for your job, your role, your organization, the prestige, the glamour, that you are just so grateful that you will settle for less than you're worth.
Yeah, that's pretty much where it's at. I don't know, Kloe, what did you see or hear when this first dropped? Because it's still open. This doesn't close.
It's still open, yeah. So if you want to apply for it, from the release of this episode, you'll have until the 19th of June. So if you want to go for it, you can. So I first heard about it in conversation with, I often don't look at iConnect. I'm really sorry. Is it on iConnect actually?
You know what? I'll check. I
thought it was, which is why I also have a statement from Icon.
It is on their website.
It is on their, okay, yeah. So I saw that it was advertised by Icon. It was brought up in my studio office, and I have, relatedly asked Icon for a little statement about this. They've been super diplomatic. So
yes, it was. It was on the iConnect on the 27th of May.
Okay, and has it got that little red bar where it says you're not paying these people enough?
It actually doesn't.
So I did actually some maths in my research for joining this conversation. I've even got my calculator still next to me. That actually, even if you take the lowest they're offering to pay on this post and you make it full-time hours, it is above the Icon minimum salary recommendation.
Interesting.
But the problem is, it's not really true. Yeah. Because that's not what you're getting.
As soon as I heard about it, I did think, guys, we need to do an episode on this because it's got there's lots of I have a lot of feelings.
I know, I can tell. I know, dear listeners, that you can't see Kloe's face right now, but it's one of a lot of emotions.
I've sort of, I've got a big list of notes and stuff. I'm not really sure how to frame my disagreements with this.
Okay.
Perhaps I should say at this point that I did email the V&A HR, but I sent them a really nice email, but I didn't get a response, but I only sent it on Friday morning because I'm a d***head and we're recording this on Sunday and I accidentally let it sit in my inbox for a day. So even had I sent it when I intended to, I only would have sent it 2 days in advance, and I don't think that's a fair right to respond.
I would say that the Fair Museum Jobs experience of challenging other V&A roles has been a lack of engagement.
We did get a response from them once over email about salary cloaking.
Okay.
Salary cloaking being when you say a salary is competitive, but you don't give numbers because the only acceptable salary is numbers.
So they've said this one is competitive, but they have given numbers.
So in the actual thing, it does say salary competitive, which is a huge red flag, guys. Never do that. And then it isn't until you scroll to the very, very bottom of the actual advert that it says that the range is between £16.50 and £28 an hour. But even then it says expected to fall within. So even that is not actually a guarantee. I just want to add that's the word is expected.
Should we just start randomly picking apart things that we don't like about this?
Can I pick my first favourite red flag? My first problem is with the idea of it being a 0-hour worker pool that is also a freelance conservators pool, because those two things are not the same type of job, are not the same type of contract, and should not be paid the same. You know, if I generously assume that it is a 8-hour working day that they're asking for, if you do a day of work with them at £28 an hour, the upper limit, I'm being as generous as possible, they would be paying you £224 for that day of work. We don't really advocate for anything under £250 a day as a freelance rate. And even then, there are so many caveats for things that should be paid more than that as a freelance rate. I'm not going to go into all of those, but certainly if that's the upper rate for this job and they're saying they encourage individuals with more specific specialisms, and you could be working any of the 7 days of the week because they're saying they're resuming their 7-day operation.
In the UK, it's expected that freelance conservators work between, from my experience and my own studio's adjustments in terms of inflation and all of that, is between £40 and £60 per hour.
Something along those lines, yes.
Maybe let's drop it to 35.
This is backed up by the museum freelance survey that included conservators. So yes, we do know that is the sort of rough rate.
My studio is £50 per hour. Basically what we're saying is it's way higher than 28, guys. Way higher. If you're saying you want freelancers, what additional benefits do you get for working for the V&A on less money than you would if you were just a freelancer working for a client that wasn't the V&A?
I think you'll find there is pension and other great benefits, so we should be grateful.
Yes, I'm really, really enjoying that the benefits are said to be pension and other great benefits. Hello, you're working for the V&A. What more could you possibly want? Maybe you can pick up a free greeting card in the shop. I don't know. But, you know, it's not very specific, is what I'm saying. And that's always a red flag as well.
Yeah, that's something we've noticed with job adverts previously.
I think it would be disingenuous of us not to mention that the V&A went through a massive range of cuts last year, including heavily to conservation and conservation science as the discipline that it is within the V&A, because they do have a slightly separate science. They did have a slightly separate scientific unit as well as conservation, and there have been massive cuts there. It is hard to see this job ad in the light of that and not feel that decisions have been made and now welcome to the consequences of your actions. You don't have enough staff to do the projects you've got because you made these choices.
So I feel like we need to step back slightly from our anger and think about possible benefits. Just for the sake of we're not impartial, guys. That's why we're doing this.
Impartiality. One advantage to working in this way is going to be that if you're in this role, you could get to work on some genuinely exciting and interesting things, and it will be really varied. If you're able to undertake this work, there is a potential that you will have an amazing, interesting and you'll learn a lot and you'll get training, you'll be in that environment. All of that is true, but that doesn't mean you're not being exploited in order for you to have that good experience. You know, it's sort of similar to volunteering in a way. You can have an amazing volunteering experience, but you're still working for free.
I think we've reached the crux of it, which is that there are some benefits for some people, but those people are from disproportionately privileged backgrounds. It doesn't benefit everyone the same, and this has an impact for the makeup of the sector workforce.
With all of the conversations that we've been having and that ICON have been having and that unions have been having, is we need to tackle the lack of diversity in the museums sector. This is the opposite of helping. Like, it's not.
Or is this consistent with one of the V&A's commitments to diversity? And I have receipts, because in one of their previous gender pay gap reports, they said that they were going to work to reduce their gender pay gap, which at the date of that report was in favour of men, by, and this is a quote that I'm not making up, hiring more low-paid men.
More low-paid men? Why not just make... Okay.
Oh boy. It's very difficult to... it's difficult to move on.
Yeah.
I was going to say, they are sort of clearly to me after mostly new graduates, by the looks of things, entry-level people. So here, again, we're back to how those people are able to afford anything. They've just gotten into massive debts because of university.
Degrees are so expensive these days.
Yeah. So there are so many levels of problems here, guys.
Perhaps we should say at this point as well, if you've applied for this job, good luck. And we love you. And if you've got to do it, you've got to do it. And unfortunately, you're being forced into the situation. You're not stupid for applying for it. They're stupid for forcing people into this situation.
And if you have applied for this job or other similar jobs, and no matter what organisation you work in, major advice here is join your union.
Join your union.
Yes.
Yeah, Prospect is good for the arts and heritage.
So if you get this job, join the union. You are entitled to, as one of the great benefits of working there, you are entitled to join the union that best represents you. I know they have a couple depending on your, type of role. So join the union, because they will be able to advocate for you.
Just to make this conversation spicier, I would like to say that I have applied for this, and for a very, very specific reason. This was, how much can I say without landing someone in shit? This was suggested to me. I'm part of a group of conservators trying to match up refugee museum professionals from Ukraine with job opportunities around them. So often they end up in London. So I'm part of a team of conservators who have volunteered to write to various organizations and try to figure out, are there any opportunities at all going at your institutions where you could help, keep up people's skills, make them feel part of a profession, even though the world is chaos and they're not having a good time.
Yeah.
This was genuinely sent to me as a sort of this might apply. This might be something that people can do. So to figure out if this was a process that I think someone with maybe not the best English skills yet, or English as a third language type level, could apply to, I've gone through the process. It is not easy. This is the usual HR system that is used for all applications within the V&A. It is a horrendous system. This isn't particularly pissing on the V&A. It's that a lot of large organizations in the museum and heritage field have the worst HR systems for filing applications that you can imagine. The forms are complicated. They ask for complicated references that no refugees ever going to be able to give you. They ask for an awful lot in complicated ways. So I would be surprised if it would apply to anyone that needs help. But I did try it because I wanted to see what it was like. And it's not an easy process. To think that this is for a 0-hour type thing where you might never even be contacted from it is sort of sucky, to be completely honest with you. If there could be a smoother way of gathering people's details in some sort of database for this sort of thing, that would be preferable. You can still have an open call to have people apply, but the method in which this is done is also not good, in addition to the actual advert being quite shite.
Can I jump in at this point and say, at no point do we think that the conservators at the V&A are in any way responsible for any of this. There's no control here. They will have been offered an option and they will have said, is that the only option you're giving us? yes, all right, I guess. Like there might have been some adjustment to wording. There might have been some, I don't know. I have no idea how much control the V&A has. Basically, this is a high decision being made to solve a problem that they've been presented by the team. This is not their fault.
Whenever we criticize job descriptions and recruitment practices and working practices, it's not about individual people. It's about an institutional approach and institutional choices. And what this says, what any job ad in any way says about your institution shows what you value, what you're trying to do, what's important to you. And it is a public thing that is published and open for debate and discussion. It's just the difference now is we're having this discussion here in a way that's going to be published as a podcast, but you were having this discussion in your workplaces, just the same.
A lot of the reasons that bad job adverts are posted is not malicious. It's a lack of resources. It's an old job advert being copied and pasted. So often it's only small amounts of influence needed to make small but meaningful changes. So a lot of the time people have more agency and more influence than they think they might.
I think what we do have to think about to try and take this, because it is ultimately depressing, but we do have to think about what we can do, to change this situation. And actually there is a significant amount of evidence, all anecdotal, nothing I could point to in writing, that things are changing. We, as Fair Museum Jobs, we set up, 5 years ago, and what comes to us now, I would say we get generally less bad things than we maybe did 5 years ago. There is a lot more open discussion and recognition of the work that needs to be done and the impact of recruitment on diversity and inclusion and equity. And I think there is a lot more open conversation, across the sector as a whole about recruitment. And I think it's really important that we are all talking about it, because when we all become managers and the people who are coming up behind us become managers, these are going to be things at the forefront of our mind that we're going to feel able to point to some evidence and challenge. And that's really important, that we all have some power and advocacy, even if you are an early career professional in your first job and you don't feel like you have power. Sometimes just asking the question, oh, why is this being done this way, can be quite powerful, because your manager might just be doing what they did last time and doing what the person before them did. And if things have just carried on over time, you taking that moment in your first job to say, I don't understand why you're doing it like this, I've seen other places do it differently, just opens that conversation, which is a start. And I think we all lose track of the fact that we do all have some power because we spend so much of our time feeling like we don't. But any small change is progress. And it's, be pleased when there is small progress, and I think. You
at Fair Museum Jobs do really excellent work, and you are literally positively impacting the museum jobs market. It's a discernible improvement. Ultimately, the goal is that we won't need to exist. We'd like to be so effective that we do ourselves out of needing to be there. That's the goal. Everything should be good. And, it's really possible to make those changes. And
Kloe, you emailed Icon as well to just sort of see what their feeling was about sort of 0-hour contracts and stuff. Was that right?
So I emailed, they got back to me within the afternoon, and Patrick wrote an essay with bullet points and links, and it was very comprehensive. I do have permission to read this out, but I'm not sure how. Do you want me to read out the whole thing?
I know that Icon stance is they're not a union.
They're not a union.
Join a union.
Join a union, yeah. It generally, they're being very diplomatic, but they understand the problem and they are keen to support their conservators in the way that they can without being a union. So, Icon remains committed to supporting professional conservators, heritage scientists and others advocating for fair remuneration and employment conditions. Our recently launched strategy link inserted, sets out ICON's aim to achieve wider recognition of the value of conservation that conservation brings to society. A key part of this is to ensure that conservation professionals will be better rewarded for their skills, expertise, and professionalism. ICON is a membership organisation and professional body rather than a trade union. Join a union. He doesn't say that. I put that in. And as such, we have limited ability to influence the job market or employment practices ourselves. However, we are committed to identifying what we can do, either on our own or in partnership with other key sector stakeholders. Following on from our 2022 Conservation Salaries Survey, link inserted, we are in the process of organising a roundtable debate on the issue of conservative salaries, which will also take into account the nature of employment, i.e. the use of freelancers and those on zero-hour contracts, to help us identify the practical steps that we take to address the problem. ICON will continue to, and we have bullet points, provide support and guidance where we can, including revising our minimum salary guidelines. Thank you for that. Encourage our members to consider joining trade unions where appropriate, and we will continue to work alongside Prospect, IPSE, and others to advocate for better pay and conditions. Join a union. Work closely with our members and our sector partners to advocate for fair levels of remuneration that are in line with those expected by a highly skilled and technical profession. Support the excellent work of lobbying organisations such as Fair Museum Jobs. ICON actively welcomes the input of our members to help shape the work that we can do in order to effectively serve professional conservators. As such, we would welcome any member to get in touch to share their views on this topic to ensure that as a sector, we can support and retain the talented conservators and heritage conservators in our field, as well as bringing in new people into the profession. And then it's the nice thank yous and hellos, and I hope that helps.
So in the interests of full disclosure, we are talking with ICON about appearing at the aforementioned event roundtable, talking about conservation salaries. And we have engaged with them in the past about our work and generally salaries in the sector. And ICON are ahead of the curve in some of their thinking, I think, on salaries compared to some of the other membership organizations. But I do think there is a general point to be made here about all membership organizations of any kind across the whole sector, of which ICON is one, but there are many others, where people are paying to advertise a job. And I think the difficulty is membership organizations need to raise money. And one of the ways they do that is by having paid for job listings. There's something in there that I can't quite articulate fully, but there is a factor in where a membership organization says that they can't do more when actually there's conflicts for you for doing more, but you actually could do more. And again, not exclusive to ICON. It's a real general situation, I think, across the board. And that is changing a little bit. So the Museums Association won't list anything with a competitive salary at all, which is the least you can do. I mean, any jobs board that isn't doing that, and we know the big American Museums Association's job board are still holding out.
Oh, nice.
Which is shocking. And there's a big, massive campaign now with the emerging museum professionals in the US to basically boycott that jobs board and not put jobs on there because they will not put in a salary rule. So I think the UK is sadly ahead of the curve in a way that shouldn't need to exist on some of that discussion. But I think there is a real conflict of membership organizations and priorities. And but ICON are doing quite a lot of work, and that there is a minimum entry level salary recommendation
that has finally been revised. So that's good.
I hope that they do then revise it more regularly as well.
Well, just going back to the jobs boards, I mean, yes, it makes the membership organisations money, but how much? I mean, they could probably take the hit if they assigned it the priority that they should do.
But I think what ICON do actually is a fairly good middle ground, because at least if something is below that minimum salary, they're flagging that is true. So they're taking your money, but they're also telling you that you need to do better. And that is visible for the individual members who are then seeing that, and you're able to at least make a conscious choice to then apply for a job that is below that salary. But as we've discussed today, this V&A pool is meeting that minimum entry level salary, but it's everything else around it. And you can't take salaries fully in isolation because there's so much else that goes into making a job environment good or bad or average.
Yeah, absolutely. And then that's, before we go into, freelance rates and everything else. The other thing that this made me think about was Christina Rosaic, one of our founders. She did a talk was it 2019? I can't remember now.
It was 2019.
About sort of the trend over time in terms of conservation salaries that had been advertised, and that there was a demonstrable shift that salaries did start going up a little bit after ICON first introduced the minimum level there. So it's not that they're always over it, because that's very much not the case, but it's more it did set off a general trend of things going slowly upwards. So it is doing something, even if it's not doing it nearly as fast as it should. And it's probably not, arguably we're not punishing people hard enough for continuing to advertise things well below that. But it is doing some good. So that is demonstrable through trends, which is just a shout out to Christina's work on that.
So I didn't clock this. I read the advert this morning for the V&A 0-hour worker pool, and I'm confused about the last point that I wrote down, and that is remuneration based on the complexity of the project. I thought that the remuneration, your pay, would be based on your level of experience. I thought that's how it would work. But if it says based on the complexity of the project, who decides how complex the project is? What do you mean by complex? Do you mean like whether you've got to, I don't know, just conserve the object, or whether you've got, say, 50 objects that you need to survey, condition report, conserve, pack, and send off? Like, what do you mean by complex?
If I had to guess, looking at the list of tasks that they're going to do, I would assume they've effectively banded the tasks. So doing a condition report or 10 condition reports, I would suspect would come in at a lower hourly pay than a specialized object treatment.
That's probably what they've done, yeah.
The final thing that I just want to bleat on about, the reason I'm annoyed about this, and this is not about I'm annoyed about the money, obviously. I'm annoyed about the freelancer and the fact that it's in London and that you're putting people in precarious position and all of this. But the thing that really gets me is, okay, I understand that museums work project-based. I do get it. Given the kind of relentlessly ambitious attitude that the big museums have, particularly the V&A maybe, have to headline exhibitions, big fancy shows, getting the objects out, the demand. I've been to the studio, one of the studios, and for training, but the demand on the conservators is constant for projects and the big fancy exhibitions where people can wander around at the private view and drink wine and have donors and all of the fancy, really, spectacular. They really in their exhibitions really raise the game of museum exhibitions. Firstly, it's assured. They know they're always going to do this. They know that all of those things have a set, they've been doing this for years. They know that all of these projects require the same amount of stuff, the same people. So my gripe is that they won't just employ people to do this. Why not? That there's going to be the work. What's the worst case scenario is that someone finishes a project and it's maybe a month or two before the work really kicks off on the next project. Why is it so bad to have a month or two to be able to go and maintain your collection? I don't understand. Go and repack stuff in the store, or do a collection survey, or rewrite your risk assessments. It really pisses me off. Like, the core stuff is important. The core stuff is why we know what we've got in the collections and why we know where it is. I'm so angry about it. You can't just live exhibition to exhibition. It's not about wandering around with a glass of wine. It's about caring for the objects and getting them access to people. My God.
This comes back to the point we previously have made. If you have a completely project-dependent sector, this is where you end up. And nobody wants to focus on core work, and nobody wants to fund core work, and it's not glamorous and it's not exciting, but it allows you to do everything else that you do as an organization. You can't run your fancy, glamorous wine and celebrity exhibitions if you don't have your stuff catalogued to even know what you have in the first place.
Yeah.
If I would want to just leave any single point for the end of this, it would be that when an organization shows you who they are and shows you what they value, you need to believe them and go in open-eyed.
Yeah, absolutely. If you're enjoying the C Word and would like to support our work, then please consider becoming one of our patrons. For as little as $1 per month, you can help us keep our episodes online and more of them coming. Patreon helps us meet our regular costs for the show, and also to plan ahead so we know roughly how much of a monthly budget we've got. That's super helpful when you're trying to do something special like buy a better microphone or save up to go to a special event. Your support also helps keep us free of advertisement. In return, our supporters get access to our archive of extended episodes, which you can only access on our Patreon page. Yeah, for that $1 a month, you get a little extra audio enjoyment. We've crunched the numbers, and it's about 10% extra content on a regular basis. Well, that's not bad for less than a cup of coffee, eh? If supporting us sounds like something you'd like to do, then head over to patreon.com/thecword and join our bunch of absolute champions. And a warm welcome to our latest patron, Maria. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for listening. We're the C Word, and you've been listening to Tom Hopkins, Louise McAward-White, Kloe Rumsey, and me, Jenny Mathiasson. Join us next time for a road trip special. In the meantime, you can check out our website at thecword.show, tweet us at the C Word Podcast, or simply email us on thecwordpodcast@gmail.com. The intro and outro music is Spring by Didi Music, used under a Creative Commons Attribution License. Additional music and sound effects by Callum Robertson. This has been a Wooden Dice production.